Commander Marcus Cole had not slept in 36 hours, and his eyes burned with exhaustion as he stared at the navigation screen aboard his salvage vessel. The Iron Promise. The distress beacon had been pulsing for 3 days before his crew picked it up, and when he traced its origin, his blood ran cold because it came from the edge of the Korethi exclusion zone, a sector of space where no human was ever supposed to travel. The Korethi Dominion had made their warning very clear 10 years ago, when they burned 3 human colonies to ash and left no survivors behind. And since that terrible day, humanity had learned to stay far away from their borders. But this beacon was different because its signal pattern was unmistakably human, and Marcus could not ignore it no matter how much danger waited ahead. "Commander, are you sure about this?" asked his second-in-command, a woman named Elena, who had served with him for 5 years and had never once questioned his judgment until this moment. "No," Marcus admitted as he pushed the ship forward into the darkness. "But someone out there is calling for help, and I will not turn my back on them." The Iron Promise was a small ship with a crew of only 12 people, and they were not soldiers or warriors, but simple salvage workers, who made their living by collecting wreckage and selling whatever useful parts they could find. They had no weapons worth mentioning, and no armor that could withstand a Korethi attack. But still they flew forward because their commander asked them to, and because every single one of them knew what it meant to be human. The wreckage appeared on their sensors after 2 more hours of travel, and what Marcus saw made his stomach turn with horror and disgust. It was a diplomatic shuttle, one of the small ships that human ambassadors used when they traveled to meet with alien species, and it had been torn apart by weapons fire that Marcus recognized all too well. Korethi plasma cannons had ripped through the hull like paper, and the ship now drifted in pieces through the cold void of space, a tomb for whoever had been aboard. "Life signs?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with tension as he brought the Iron Promise alongside the largest section of wreckage. Elena checked her instruments, and her eyes went wide with surprise before she answered. "1, Commander, just 1, and it is very weak but definitely still alive." Marcus made his decision in an instant and stood up from his chair with determination burning in his chest. "I am going in alone," he announced to his crew, "and if anything goes wrong, you will leave this place immediately and not look back." His crew protested and argued and begged him to reconsider, but Marcus would not listen because he knew that every second he wasted was a second that the survivor might not have. He suited up in his environmental gear and crossed through the airlock into the broken remains of the diplomatic shuttle, and the silence that greeted him was heavier than anything he had ever felt before. The interior of the ship was destroyed beyond recognition, with cables hanging from the ceiling like dead vines and panels torn from the walls to reveal the broken machinery beneath. Marcus moved carefully through the debris, following the signal from his life sign detector as it led him deeper into the wreckage. And with every step he took, he felt the weight of this cursed place pressing down upon him. Then he heard it, a voice so weak and trembling that he almost mistook it for the groaning of the damaged ship around him. The words were not in any human language, but in the melodic and flowing tongue of the Korethi, and even though Marcus did not understand every word, he understood the meaning behind them perfectly. Someone was begging, pleading, crying out for mercy and salvation. "Please," the voice whimpered in broken syllables that needed no translation. "Please do not leave me here to die alone in this cold and terrible darkness." Marcus followed the sound to a collapsed corridor, where a massive support beam had fallen from the ceiling and trapped something beneath its crushing weight. He activated his helmet light and aimed it at the figure on the ground, and what he saw made him freeze in place with shock and disbelief. The creature beneath the beam was not human at all, but a Korethi female with silver blue skin that shimmered even in the dim light of his helmet. She had 4 eyes that glowed with a soft luminescence, though that glow was fading fast as her life slipped away, and her body was covered in wounds that leaked dark purple blood onto the floor beneath her. A Karathi, one of the enemy, one of the monsters who had burned human children alive and laughed while entire cities turned to fire and ash. Every muscle in Marcus's body went tight with rage and hatred, and his memories flooded through his mind like poison. He remembered New Helsinki, the colony where his sister had lived with her husband and her 2 young daughters. He remembered the last transmission he received from her, her voice full of terror as she described the sky turning orange with flames, and then nothing but static and silence forever. He remembered the photographs that the rescue teams had shared, images so horrible that they still haunted his dreams every single night. The Karathi had done that, and this creature on the ground before him was one of them. Marcus's hands clenched into fists and his jaw tightened with fury as he stared down at the wounded alien, who continued to whimper and beg for a mercy she did not deserve. He could walk away right now, and no one would ever blame him for it. He could leave this monster to die alone in the dark, just as her people had left so many humans to die, and the universe would call it justice. But even as these thoughts burned through his mind, Marcus found himself unable to move, unable to turn his back, unable to become the very thing he hated. Because the creature before him was not a soldier or a warrior or a commander who had given orders to kill. She was wounded and afraid and alone, and she was begging him for help with tears streaming from her 4 strange eyes. And Marcus Cole, despite all his pain and all his rage and all his loss, was still human. He knelt beside her and wrapped his hands around the beam that trapped her, and the Karathi female stared at him with an expression of pure disbelief. "What are you doing?" She gasped in broken human words that she must have learned somewhere. "Something stupid," Marcus growled as he began to lift. "So hold still and try not to die." The metal beam was heavier than anything Marcus had ever tried to lift in his entire life, and his muscles screamed in protest as he strained against its terrible weight. Sweat poured down his face inside his helmet, and his arms shook with effort. But he refused to give up because giving up was simply not something that humans knew how to do. "Move when I tell you," he grunted through clenched teeth, "and move fast because I cannot hold this forever." The Karathi female stared at him with those 4 glowing eyes, and Marcus could see 1,000 questions swimming in their depths. Questions about why a human would help her and what trick he was playing, and whether this was some cruel joke before the killing blow. But she did not ask any of those questions because she was too busy trying to stay alive. "Now!" Marcus roared as he lifted the beam just high enough for her to crawl free, and the alien female dragged herself across the floor with desperate speed until she was clear of the debris. Marcus dropped the beam with a thunderous crash and fell to his knees, gasping for breath as every muscle in his body burned with exhaustion. The Karathi female lay on the ground beside him, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe through her injuries, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she turned her head to look at him, and her voice came out as barely more than a whisper filled with confusion and wonder. "Why?" she asked in that broken human speech. "Why would you save me when my people have done such terrible things to yours?" Marcus did not answer right away because he was asking himself the same question. He looked at her lying there on the cold metal floor. This creature, who belonged to a species that had murdered millions of his kind. And he tried to find the hatred that had burned so bright in his heart just moments ago. It was still there, buried deep beneath the surface, a hot coal of rage that would never fully die. But something else was there too, something that his parents had taught him long ago, when he was just a small boy growing up on a farming colony at the edge of human space. They had taught him that mercy was not weakness but strength, and that the true measure of a person was not how they treated their friends, but how they treated their enemies. He had not understood those words when he was young, but he understood them now as he knelt beside this wounded alien in the wreckage of a destroyed ship. "Because I am human," he finally said, "and this is what we do." He reached down and grabbed her arm, pulling her up from the floor, and as he did, his eyes fell upon the torn fabric of her robes and the symbol that was embroidered there in threads of gold and silver. Marcus had studied the Korathi during the long years of war, learning everything he could about his enemy so that he might one day have an advantage against them. He recognized that symbol immediately, and when understanding hit him, he froze in absolute shock. The mark of the Vayari, the royal bloodline of the Korathi Dominion, was staring back at him from the chest of the woman he had just saved. This was not just any Korathi female, but a member of the imperial family itself. "You are royalty," Marcus breathed as his mind struggled to process what his eyes were telling him. "You are one of the princesses of the Dominion." The alien female lowered her eyes in what might have been shame or perhaps simply exhaustion, and when she spoke again, her voice was heavy with sorrow. "I am Sarelveth Korathi," she admitted, "third daughter of the warlord emperor and heir to the southern provinces of our home world." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath his feet, because he had just saved one of the most important people in the entire Korathi Empire. The daughter of the very man who had ordered the destruction of human colonies and the slaughter of innocent civilians. His grip on her arm tightened involuntarily, and for a moment, the darkness in his heart whispered that he should finish what the attackers had started. But Sarelveth did not flinch or pull away from him, even though she must have known what he was thinking. "If you wish to kill me now, I will not stop you," she said quietly. "I have no strength left to fight, and perhaps death at the hands of a human would be fitting justice for what my family has done." "What are you doing out here?" Marcus demanded, ignoring her offer of surrender. Why was a Korathi princess traveling through this sector in a human diplomatic shuttle? Sarelveth closed her 4 eyes and let out a long breath that seemed to carry the weight of the entire galaxy upon it. "I was trying to make peace," she whispered. "I was traveling in secret to meet with human ambassadors who had agreed to hear my proposal for ending this terrible war." Marcus stared at her in disbelief, because everything he knew about the Korathi told him that peace was impossible. They were a warrior species who valued conquest above all else, and their emperor had sworn to wipe humanity from the stars. "You expect me to believe that?" he asked with suspicion thick in his voice. "I do not expect you to believe anything," Sarelveth replied, "but it is the truth whether you accept it or not." She opened her eyes and looked at him with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. "My own people shut me down," she continued. "The War Council discovered my secret mission and sent assassins to stop me before I could reach your ambassadors." "Why would you risk your life for peace with humans?" Marcus asked. "Your people hate us more than any other species in the galaxy." "Because I have seen things that my people do not want to see," Sarelveth answered. "I have read the reports that my father keeps hidden from our citizens. The true accounts of what happens when any species goes to war against humanity." She paused to catch her breath, and Marcus noticed that her wounds were still bleeding badly. "We need to get you back to my ship," he said, making a decision that he knew would change everything. "You can tell me the rest of your story while I try to keep you alive." He lifted her carefully in his arms, surprised by how light she was despite her tall and elegant frame. "Why are you still helping me?" Sarelveth asked with genuine confusion in her voice. "You know who I am now, and you know what my family has done to your people." Marcus began walking back through the wreckage toward the airlock where his ship waited. "Because killing you would not bring back the people I lost," he said. "And because maybe, just maybe, you might actually be telling the truth about wanting peace." He looked down at her as he walked. This strange alien princess who had risked everything for a chance to end a war that had claimed so many lives. "And if you are telling the truth," he added, "then you might be the most important person in this entire galaxy right now." Sarelveth said nothing in response, but Marcus saw something change in her eyes, something that looked almost like hope. And in that moment, Neither of them knew that their meeting in this broken ship would set in motion events that would change the fate of two civilizations forever. The crew of the Iron Promise stood in stunned silence as Marcus carried the wounded Carthy princess through the airlock and onto their ship. Elena was the first to find her voice, and when she spoke, her words came out sharp with fear and anger. "Commander, have you lost your mind?" she demanded. "That is a Korathi, one of the monsters who burned our colonies and murdered our families." "I know exactly what she is," Marcus replied as he carried Sirovith toward the medical bay. "And I also know that she needs help right now or she will die." The other crew members stepped aside as he passed, their eyes wide with disbelief and their hands trembling with barely controlled rage. Marcus understood their feelings because he shared them, but he also knew that this moment was bigger than any of their personal pain. He laid Sirovith down on the medical table and began gathering supplies to treat her wounds. And the alien princess watched him with those four glowing eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Your people are afraid of me," she observed quietly. "They have every reason to be afraid," Marcus replied as he cleaned the deep gash on her side. "Your kind has given us nothing but reasons to hate and fear you. And yet you still help me," Sirovith said, "even though I can see the hatred in your eyes every time you look at me." Marcus paused in his work and met her gaze with a hard stare. Yes, I hate you," he admitted without shame. "I hate everything your species represents and everything your family has done to mine." He returned to treating her wounds with hands that remained steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "But I was raised to believe that hate is not a good enough reason to let someone die," he continued, "especially when that someone might be the key to ending this war." Sirovith was quiet for a long moment as Marcus worked on her injuries, and when she finally spoke again, her voice was softer than before. "You want to know why I risked everything for peace," she said. "Let me tell you what I have learned about your species." Marcus said nothing but continued to listen as he bandaged her wounds. "When my people first discovered humanity, we thought you were nothing more than primitive animals," Sirovith began. "Your technology was centuries behind ours, and your bodies were weak and fragile compared to our warriors. We decided to exterminate you before you could become a threat, just as we had done to dozens of other young species throughout our history." She paused and winced as Marcus applied pressure to a particularly deep wound. "But something strange happened when we attacked your worlds," she continued. "Your people did not surrender or flee as so many others had done before. Instead, you fought back with a fury that we had never seen from any species in the galaxy." Marcus felt a grim satisfaction at her words because he knew the stories of those early battles all too well. Human soldiers had thrown themselves against superior Korathi forces with nothing but determination and rage. And though many had died, they had made the enemy pay dearly for every inch of ground. "We expected to crush your species within a single rotation of your home world around its star," Sirovith said. "But 10 of your years have passed, and humanity is still fighting. Not just surviving, but actually pushing back against our forces in ways that should be impossible." She turned her head to look at Marcus directly, and he saw something in her eyes that he had never expected to see from a Carthy. It was respect. "I began to study your kind in secret," she admitted. "I read every report and every analysis that our military had gathered about human behavior and psychology. And what I found terrified me more than any weapon or army ever could." Marcus finished bandaging her final wound and stepped back to look at her. "What did you find?" he asked. "I found that humanity is not like any other species in the known galaxy," Sirovith answered. "You do not behave according to logic or reason or self-preservation. When we destroyed your colonies, we expected you to negotiate for peace out of fear. Instead, Your entire species united in rage and swore vengeance against us. When we killed your soldiers, we expected the survivors to lose their will to fight. Instead, they fought harder and with even more determination. When we captured your people and tried to break their spirits, they refused to break no matter what we did to them. She shook her head slowly as if she still could not believe what she was saying. But the most terrifying thing about humanity is not your rage or your determination or your refusal to surrender. The most terrifying thing is something that my people have never understood and probably never will. What is that? Marcus asked. Forgiveness. Cyrilveth whispered the word like it was sacred. You humans have this incredible capacity to forgive even those who have wronged you in the most terrible ways. You make peace with your enemies and then actually honor those agreements. You show mercy to those who have shown you none. You save the lives of creatures who would have gladly killed you if the situation were reversed. She gestured at herself, lying on a medical table. A living example of the very thing she was describing. No other species in the galaxy does this, she said. When the Nexari Collective loses a war, they plot revenge for generations. When the Void Swarm is defeated, they simply wait and rebuild until they can attack again. But humans, you actually move forward and build something new with your former enemies. Marcus had never thought about it that way before, but as he listened to her words, he realized that she was right. Humanity had fought countless wars throughout its history, and many times the enemies of one generation had become the allies of the next. That is why I came to seek peace, Cyrilveth said, because I believe that humanity is the only species in this galaxy that might actually forgive us for what we have done. And if there is any chance of saving my people from the destruction that this war will bring, it lies with you. Marcus stood in silence for a long moment, processing everything she had told him. You think your people will be destroyed if the war continues? He asked. I know they will be, Cyrilveth replied with absolute certainty, because I have studied human history. Every single species that has ever tried to destroy humanity has eventually been defeated. Not because you are stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because you simply refuse to give up. And in the end, that determination always wins. She looked at him with those 4 strange eyes, and Marcus saw tears beginning to form in them. My father is leading our people toward extinction, she said, and I would do anything to stop him, even if it means being called a traitor by my own kind. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that he knew would change everything. Rest now, he told her. We have a long journey ahead of us, and you need to heal. Where are we going? Cyrilveth asked. Somewhere safe, Marcus replied. Somewhere we can figure out how to use what you know to actually end this war. And as the princess closed her eyes to rest, Marcus walked out to face his crew, knowing that the hardest part of this journey was only just beginning. The alarm started screaming exactly 6 hours after they left the wreckage behind, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he stared at the sensor display. 3 Carthy warships had appeared on the edge of their scanning range, and they were moving fast, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Devastator-class cruisers, Elena reported with fear thick in her voice. Each one carries enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Marcus gripped the arms of his command chair so tight that his knuckles turned white because he knew exactly what those ships meant. The Carthy had come for their princess, and they would destroy anything that stood in their way. How did they find us so quickly? One of the crew members asked in a panicked voice. The princess must have a tracking device implanted in her body, Elena guessed. All members of the royal family probably have them. Marcus turned to look at Cyrilveth, who had come to the bridge despite her injuries when she heard the alarms. Is that true? He demanded. The princess nodded slowly, her 4 eyes filled with guilt and shame. I forgot about the device in the chaos of the crash. She admitted, I am sorry. I have brought death upon your entire crew. A communication signal cut through the tension, and the main screen flickered to life with the image of a Korethi commander whose face was twisted with contempt and hatred. Human vessel, the commander announced in a voice like grinding metal. You have something that belongs to us. Surrender the traitor princess immediately, and we will grant you a quick death. Refuse, and we will tear your ship apart piece by piece while you watch. Marcus stood up from his chair and faced the screen with a calm that he did not actually feel. This is Commander Marcus Cole of the salvage vessel Iron Promise, he replied, and I have a counteroffer for you. Turn your ships around and go home, or I will make you regret ever entering this sector. The Korethi commander laughed, a horrible sound that echoed through the bridge like the screech of tearing metal. You dare threaten us? He mocked. You are one tiny ship with no weapons against 3 of the most powerful warships in the Dominion fleet. You cannot fight us, human. You can only die. Marcus smiled, and it was not a friendly smile but the grin of a predator about to strike. You are right about one thing, he admitted. I cannot fight you, but I can do something much worse. He cut the communication and turned to face his crew with fire burning in his eyes. All hands to emergency stations. He commanded, we are going to run, and we are going to make these bastards chase us through hell itself. Elena looked at him with disbelief written all over her face. Commander, their ships are faster than ours, she protested. We cannot outrun them. We do not need to outrun them, Marcus replied with that same dangerous smile. We just need to survive long enough to reach the shattered zone. Every member of the crew went pale at those words because the shattered zone was one of the most dangerous regions in all of known space. It was the remains of a solar system that had been destroyed in some ancient catastrophe. Now nothing but a swirling mass of asteroids and debris and radiation that could tear apart any ship foolish enough to enter. That is suicide, Elena shouted. Maybe, Marcus agreed as he pushed the engines to maximum power, but it is also our only chance. What followed was the most terrifying 3 hours of Marcus's entire life as he piloted the Iron Promise through obstacles that no sane person would ever attempt. The Korethi warships pursued them with relentless determination, firing their plasma cannons whenever they got a clear shot. The Iron Promise shook and groaned as near misses exploded around them, and Marcus could feel his ship screaming in protest as he pushed her harder than she had ever been pushed before. They reached the outer edge of the shattered zone, and Marcus did not hesitate for even a second before plunging straight into the chaos. Asteroids the size of mountains tumbled through space all around them, and Marcus weaved between them with reflexes that bordered on supernatural. Behind them, the first Korethi warship tried to follow and was not so lucky. A massive asteroid collided with its hull and tore through the ship like a knife through paper, and the resulting explosion lit up the darkness of space like a second sun. One down, Elena shouted with fierce joy in her voice. But there were still 2 more warships behind them, and both had learned from their companion's mistake. They moved more carefully now, but they did not give up the chase because the prize they sought was too valuable to abandon. Marcus flew deeper into the shattered zone, pushing through gaps that should have been too small for his ship to fit through. The hull groaned and sparks flew from damaged systems, but the Iron Promise held together through sheer stubbornness. Commander, we are approaching the radiation belt, Elena warned. If we go in there, our shields will fail within minutes. I know, Marcus shouted back, but so will theirs. He aimed the ship straight at the glowing wall of deadly energy and punched through it without slowing down. The radiation alarm screamed and the shields flickered dangerously, but Marcus had calculated the risk and knew they could survive if they moved fast enough. The second Korethi warship was not so careful. It entered the radiation belt at full speed, and its larger shields could not adapt quickly enough to the changing conditions. The ship's systems failed one by one, and then the radiation reached the engine core and triggered a cascade failure that consumed the entire vessel in a ball of fire. "Two down!" The crew cheered as they watched the explosion on their screens. But the third warship had stopped at the edge of the radiation belt, and Marcus watched as it began to circle around, looking for another way to reach them. He used those precious minutes to push through the radiation belt and emerge on the other side, where the relative safety of normal space waited. The final Karithi warship appeared behind them moments later, damaged and smoking, but still very much a threat. But Marcus had one last trick left to play. He aimed the Iron Promise at a massive chunk of debris that floated nearby, the remains of what might have once been a planet. "Everyone hold on," he shouted as he flew straight into a canyon on the debris surface, his ship scraping against the walls as he navigated the impossible terrain. The Karithi warship tried to follow, but it was too large and too slow. It crashed into the canyon walls and exploded in a ball of flame that Marcus watched with grim satisfaction. Silence fell over the bridge as the crew realized that they had actually survived. Elena turned to stare at Marcus with an expression of pure disbelief. "How did you do that?" she whispered. Marcus slumped back in his chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him now that the danger had passed. "I did not do anything special," he said. "I just did what humans have always done. I refused to give up." Behind him, Sarilveth watched the scene with tears streaming down her face. And in that moment, she understood exactly why humanity was the most terrifying species in the galaxy. Not because they were strong, but because they simply would not break. 3 months had passed since the desperate escape through the Shattered Zone, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Princess Sarilveth Karithi stood at the center of the Galactic Assembly, a massive chamber where representatives from 100 different species gathered to discuss matters of cosmic importance. She was no longer the wounded and desperate creature that Marcus had pulled from the wreckage of a destroyed ship. Now she stood tall and proud, dressed in the traditional robes of a Karithi diplomat, her 4 eyes sweeping across the assembled delegates with calm confidence. Beside her stood Commander Marcus Cole, no longer a simple salvage operator, but now recognized as one of the key figures in the most important diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history. The ceasefire between humanity and the Karithi Dominion had been announced just 2 weeks ago, and already the effects were rippling through every corner of known space. For the first time in 10 years, human ships could travel near Karithi space without fear of attack. For the first time in living memory, representatives from both species were talking instead of fighting. It was not peace, not yet, because there was too much blood and too much pain on both sides for true peace to come quickly. But it was a beginning, and sometimes a beginning was all that anyone could hope for. Sarilveth finished her speech to the assembly, her words calling for understanding and cooperation between all species of the galaxy. The delegates responded with a mixture of applause and silence, some still unable to believe what they were witnessing. A Karithi princess advocating for peace with humans was something that had seemed impossible just months ago. As Sarilveth stepped away from the speaking platform, she was approached by the Nexuri ambassador, a tall insectoid creature whose compound eyes glittered with curiosity. "Your Highness," the ambassador chittered in the clicking language of his kind, "I must confess that I still do not understand what happened. How did a human salvage captain manage to turn a Karithi princess into an advocate for peace?" Sarilveth smiled, an expression she had learned from watching humans during her time aboard the Iron Promise. "He did not turn me into anything," she replied. "He simply showed me what humans are truly capable of." "And what is that?" the ambassador asked. "Compassion," Sarilveth answered. "In a moment when he had every right to hate me, every reason to leave me to die, he chose to help me instead. That single act of mercy changed everything I believed about his species." The ambassador shook his head in confusion, unable to comprehend what she was describing. Across the chamber, Marcus stood alone near a large window that looked out upon the stars, and he watched the political drama unfold with mixed feelings in his heart. He was proud of what they had accomplished, but he also knew that the hard work was only beginning. The ceasefire was fragile, and there were powerful forces on both sides who wanted the war to continue. He felt someone approach and turned to find the Nexari ambassador standing beside him. "I have a question for you, Commander Cole," the ambassador said, "if you will permit me to ask it." "Go ahead," Marcus replied. "When you found Princess Cyril Veth in that wreckage, you knew she was a Korathi, one of the species that had murdered millions of your kind. You knew that leaving her to die would have been considered justice by almost anyone in the galaxy. So why did you save her?" The ambassador's compound eyes focused on Marcus with intense curiosity. "What possible reason could you have had for showing mercy to your enemy?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment as he considered the question, and his mind drifted back to that dark moment in the destroyed ship. He remembered the hatred burning in his chest and the grief that never fully went away. He remembered his sister's face and the sound of her voice in that final transmission. He remembered standing over a wounded alien who was begging for her life, and he remembered the choice he had made. "When I was young," Marcus finally said, "my mother told me a story about two neighbors who hated each other. They fought and argued for years, and each one believed that the other was evil and deserving of destruction. One day, the house of one neighbor caught fire, and the other neighbor had a choice to make. He could let his enemy burn and finally be free of their conflict forever. Or he could try to save him, even knowing that his enemy might never thank him for it." Marcus turned to look at the ambassador with steady eyes. "The neighbor chose to help," he continued, "and when his enemy asked why, he said something that I have never forgotten. He said that the moment we start seeing enemies instead of people is the moment we lose what makes us human. And he would rather risk his life trying to save someone who might not deserve it than live knowing he had become the very monster he claimed to hate." The ambassador was silent for a long moment, processing these words. "That is a strange philosophy," he finally said. "Most species in the galaxy would consider it weakness." "Maybe it is," Marcus admitted with a small shrug. "But it is also the reason why humanity has survived every attempt to destroy us. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But we have something that other species do not seem to understand. We have the ability to look at our worst enemy and see a person who might be worth saving. And sometimes, that makes all the difference." Across the chamber, Cyril Veth caught his eye and inclined her head in the Korathi gesture of deepest respect. Marcus returned the gesture with a human nod, and for a moment, the two of them shared a connection that transcended all the hatred and violence between their species. The war was not over, and Marcus knew that there would be more battles and more death before true peace could be achieved. But standing here in the Galactic Assembly, watching a Korathi princess advocate for cooperation with humanity, he allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in years. He felt hope. And as the delegates continued their discussions and the slow work of building peace moved forward, Marcus Cole looked out at the stars and smiled. Because somewhere out there, on 1,000 different worlds, humans were doing what they had always done. They were fighting when they had to fight. They were protecting those who could not protect themselves. They were showing mercy to those who asked for it. And they were proving once again that the most powerful force in the galaxy was not a weapon or an army or a fleet of warships. It was the simple choice to see an enemy as a person and to offer them a hand instead of a fist. That was what it meant to be human. And that was why, no matter what challenges lay ahead, Marcus knew that humanity would endure. Because they always had and they always would. For that was the way of his people, and it always would be.